The movie opens up with the narrator telling us a story about a little girl who received a special red velvet hood from her beloved grandmother. This girl, who cherished her grandmother's gift, wore the red hood during all her adventures and became known as Little Red Riding Hood. The story then shifts to Red, who is traveling through a dense forest on her way to a place called Spenhagen. During her journey, she encounters a persistent witch named Barbara. Red tries to avoid the witch, but Barbara is determined to give her a pair of magical shoes. Initially, Red declines the offer, but after much insistence, she reluctantly agrees. However, when Barbara uses her magic, instead of making Red's shoes better, she ends up ruining them, making them dirty. Red has to wash her shoes in a nearby stream, but when Barbara distracts her in a conversation, they get carried away by the water. Now walking with bare feet toward her destination, Red eventually sees a young woman wearing her boots. She approaches the girl and asks about her shoes. To her surprise, the girl willingly gives them back and introduces herself as Cinderella. Red, with her keen observation skills, notices that Cinderella's clothing is in poor condition and realizes that she's mistreated by her stepmother and stepsisters, who treat her like a servant. When Red tells Cinderella about her observations, Cinderella confirms it and explains that her stepsisters, Anne and Margaret, are getting ready to attend the prince's ball that night. The prince is expected to choose a bride at the ball, and Cinderella wishes to go because she has heard that the prince doesn't judge based on appearance. Upon hearing Cinderella's wish to attend the ball, Red decides to help and go with her. However, they lack proper dresses for the royal event. Luckily, Barbara the witch appears there and offers to provide them with a new dress. She then uses her magic to transform the young girl's clothes into stunning attire. Unfortunately, they still need suitable shoes, and Barbara struggles with her magic on footwear. Right then, Barbara's niece Tekla, who is also a witch, appears and provides them with exquisite glass sandals. She also warns them that the magic will fade in 24 hours, and the shoes won't fit anyone else. The witch also transforms a pumpkin into a carriage and a rat into their coachman, Paul. Now elegantly dressed and well-prepared, Cinderella and Red set out to attend the ball at the king's castle. As they travel through the forest, suddenly the carriage bumps into something and stops. Paul steps out to discover that their carriage has hit a man, and he has died from the injury. However, Cinderella looks close and recognizes the man as Hans, the king's renowned hairdresser, known for his ability to make anyone look beautiful. Right then, Red's keen detective skills come into play, and she reveals that Hans didn't die from the accident, but had a severe head injury before. She comes to the conclusion that someone had placed his body in front of their carriage to make it look like an accident. Assuming that they will be late for the party if they inform the authorities, the girls hide Hans's body by the road with leaves and continue to the castle. In the next scene, Red and Cinderella arrive at the entrance of the castle. Upon their arrival, a poorly dressed woman is denied entry by the guard. On the other hand, Red and Cinderella make their way to the ballroom, where they see Cinderella's stepmother and her elder stepsister, Anne. However, the younger sister, Margaret, is missing, and even her family is uncertain about her whereabouts. They also notice that Anne has had her long hair cut short by Hans, and the stepmother assures her daughter that the prince prefers women with shorter hair. After a while, the king, Beauvel, and his son, Prince Gilbert, arrive at the hall, signaling the start of the party. The king instructs his sons to choose a dance partner from the women at the party, who will become his bride. Surprisingly, Gilbert selects Cinderella to dance with, leaving everyone astonished. Suddenly, the moment is interrupted when a royal guard hurriedly approaches the king and announces the mysterious death of Hans. He mentions that the body of the hairdresser has been found on the way to the castle, all injured, and hints that the carriage might have hit him. Suspicion arises, and all the carriages are ordered to be inspected. Luckily, during the investigation, no blood is found on the carriages because Paul had already cleaned the women's carriage. However, cheese crumbs are discovered near Hans's body, and it is deduced that the killer must like cheese very much. Hearing this, Paul hides the cheese in his hand and leaves the room. Meanwhile, the poorly dressed woman from earlier sneaks into the castle unnoticed. Next, guards investigate Hans's home and discover a bloodied wet stone on the floor, indicating that the murder occurred there. They also find beautiful locks of women's hair with decorative ribbons in a bag, implying that the killer had recently had a haircut. When the soldiers present everything in front of the king, Cinderella is surprised to see Anne's ribbon among them because her stepsister loves her long hair. Next, all the women with short hair, including Anne, are lined up for questioning about Hans's murder. At this moment, Red offers to help the king investigate, and he agrees. She then talks to Anne, who explains that she loved her long hair very much, and Hans forcibly cut her hair at 10 a.m. She also mentions overhearing a quarrel between Hans and the prince in his chambers when she entered the castle at 1 p.m. Following this, the king turns to the prince, and he is questioned about his involvement in the murder of Hans. The latter explains that in the morning, when Hans came to do his makeover, he found a girl's hair in his bag. Following this, when he confronted Hans, the hairdresser revealed his motive for cutting women's hair. Gilbert also states that Hans replied he did not want any other woman to look beautiful and have long hair. Moreover, the prince also revealed that Hans blackmailed him by threatening to expose his past act of throwing the king's crown in the trash. Hearing all this, the blame for the murder shifts towards the prince. However, Gilbert defends himself by claiming he was on a mountain during the time frame incident. The king then asks him if anyone had seen him going there, but the prince replies that he was all alone and there are no witnesses. The scene then goes back to the past, where Prince Gilbert was in love with a castle maid named Remy. The two seem to be deeply in love and plan to marry, but the king refuses their relationship, and Remy mysteriously disappears the very next day. The prince believes his father, King Beauvel, is involved in her disappearance, and in anger, throws the royal crown away. Back to the present, when the prince mentions all this, the king denies any involvement in Remy's disappearance. In the present, we learn that Hans, the cunning hairdresser, discovered the prince's secret of throwing the king's crown away and used it for blackmail. Hans was also envious of women with beautiful long hair that he hadn't styled, so he would cut their hair and collect it. On the day of the ball, although the prince learned about Hans's actions, he couldn't act against him due to the threat of exposure of his secret. In the next scene, Prince Gilbert clarifies that Hans had been blackmailing him, demanding an expensive royal handheld mirror. Initially, Gilbert agreed to the arrangement, but later decided to put an end to this corrupt relationship and planned to confess his actions to the king that night. When Hans's messenger came to collect the mirror, Gilbert sent him away, deciding not to yield to the blackmailer's demands. However, the secret between the two men implicates Prince Gilbert in the murder, leading to his arrest. Moreover, the king also points out that the prince was absent from the dance rehearsal, casting doubt on his forest stroll alibi. Nevertheless, Red discovers a thorn in Gilbert's clothes, suggesting he had indeed taken the stroll, since thorn bushes grew along that hilly path. Just then, a woman in shabby clothes sneaks into the ballroom, providing an alibi for the prince. She claims to have seen him on the hilltop between 1 and 3 p.m. Here, although her face is hidden, her testimony holds weight, leading to the king announcing Prince Gilbert's release. After the king announces the verdict, the party concludes. Just then, the castle bell chimes, indicating it is midnight. Hearing the midnight bell chimes, Red advises Cinderella to leave the castle immediately before the magic wears off and their secret is revealed. Cinderella also follows her suggestion and hurries away, but loses a glass slipper in the process. Gilbert tries to stop them, but neither of the girls heeds his pleas. Luckily, Paul helps them escape before the clock strikes midnight and manages to take them away from the castle before the final chime. Suddenly, the magic dissipates and everything turns back to normal, the carriage into a pumpkin, and the girls back into their normal clothes. Following this, to spend the night, Red joins Cinderella in her room. However, later that night, the former hears noises outside and cannot sleep. Carrying a lamp, she ventures into the forest to investigate. In her search, Red discovers Cinderella's younger stepsister, Margaret, hiding in the forest from the soldiers. The latter asks for Red's help in hiding, and when Red inquires about why she's hiding, Margaret admits that she killed Hans. When Red converses with Margaret, she discovers that Margaret received a letter from Hans that afternoon. Margaret mentions that Hans asked her to visit his house for a hairstyling. However, when Margaret arrived at his place, an unseen assailant struck her from behind, causing her to lose consciousness. Margaret explains that upon awakening, she found a bloodied whetstone in her hand and saw Hans's lifeless body nearby. She also noticed her sister Anne's beautiful hair on Hans's desk. Seeing this, she believed that she had committed the murder in retaliation for Hans cutting her sister's long hair. Red then inquires about Margaret's actions following the incident, and the latter confesses to devising a plan to dispose of the body in a way that would make it appear accidental. In a flashback, we witness Margaret transporting Hans's body to the forest, where she waits for a passing carriage. As soon as Cinderella and Red's magical carriage approaches, Margaret places the body in its path and retreats into the woods. Back to the present, soldiers discover Margaret and Red. To Margaret's shock, Red informs the soldiers that Margaret confessed to killing Mr. Hans. As they take Margaret into custody, she drops a piece of glass from her dress. While Red Riding Hood permits Margaret's arrest for her bullying behavior, she privately tells the senior guard, Lord Chamberlain, that Margaret isn't the true murderer. Red also asks Chamberlain to accompany her to Hans's house to investigate further. At Hans's residence, Red inspects the premises and notices year-old bloodstains, likely unrelated to Hans. There, she gets a vision about everything related to the case and confers with Chamberlain, requesting his assistance in solving the case. The following day, as Cinderella dries her clothes in the sun, Prince Gilbert, Chamberlain, and the troops arrive. Chamberlain presents Cinderella with a glass sandal and asks her to try it on. With excitement, Cinderella places her foot in the slipper and it fits perfectly. However, instead of Gilbert accepting her, he orders his soldiers to arrest Cinderella. At this moment, Red reveals herself and accuses Cinderella of Hans's murder. In her defense, Cinderella attempts to convince everyone of her innocence, but Red counters her argument by sharing her observations. Red mentions that on the afternoon of the ball, Cinderella had been yearning for a means to become beautiful to attend the ball party. Right then, Hans appeared and offered to style her hair and make her pretty, and Cinderella agreed to Hans's offer. Red reveals that when Cinderella visited Hans's house, the hairdresser tried to cut her hair without her consent due to his jealousy. In response, Cinderella used Hans's whetstone as a weapon for her defense, killing him unknowingly. She then subsequently hatched a plan, inviting Margaret to Hans's house to frame her for the murder. Cinderella sent a letter to Margaret, luring her to the location, and when Margaret arrived, Cinderella rendered her unconscious and fled, aiming to make it seem as though Margaret was the killer. At present, Cinderella attempts to defend herself, claiming she only possesses a single pair of glass slippers. However, Red refutes her statement and summons both Barbara and Tekla to provide confirmation. It turns out that after Barbara changed Cinderella's attire, Tekla didn't recognize her and mistakenly provided her with an additional pair of glass slippers. This means that Cinderella had two pairs of glass slippers. One she used in the murder, and the other she wore to the ball. She buried the broken pair in her pigeon's grave. Cinderella initially denies the charges, but when the first pair of glass slippers returns to their original state after 24 hours, she confesses to her crimes. She is then taken away by the guards. With the murder mystery resolved, Prince Gilbert faces the task of choosing a bride, and another mystery is unraveled by Red. The woman in shabby clothes is revealed to be Prince Gilbert's original lover, Remy. The scene then flashes back to a year ago, when Remy had been lured to Hans's house. After Remy reaches there, the spiteful hairdresser attempts to cut her beautiful long hair out of jealousy. Remy narrowly escapes the ordeal, but is left with a scar on her cheek from the scissors. She believes her scar makes her unworthy of Prince Gilbert's love, so she decides to keep herself hidden from the prince and society. In the present, Remy still loves Prince Gilbert and is the one who secretly watches over him from the hills. Learning of her devotion, Prince Gilbert confesses his love for her, assuring her that the scar does not diminish his feelings. Eventually, Remy and Gilbert marry with the blessing of King Beauvais, and Red also attends the ceremony. The movie concludes with the royal family bidding farewell to Red for her help in resolving their issues, wishing her all the best for her upcoming adventures.